Welcome back to Mavericks of the Machine, the channel that gets its hands dirty with the real, unvarnished stories of military invention. We talk a lot about the heroes who fly the planes and drive the tanks, but tonight, I want to talk about the machine shop. I want to talk about the smell of cutting oil, the sting of welding flash, and the bitter, lonely taste of knowing you're right when the entire world, all the experts, all the PhDs, all the men in the clean white shirts are laughing in your face. They tell you that innovation comes from cleanroom laboratories and million-dollar wind tunnels. Mine came from desperation. It came from reading the after-action reports of pilots, young men, kids really, who were dying because their planes, the best we could build, were hitting an invisible wall in the sky. They'd dive on an enemy, and the air itself would turn to concrete. The controls would freeze. The plane would shake itself to pieces, and a good man would become a statistic. The experts said it was an airframe problem. They were wrong. It was a propeller problem, and my solution, the one I sketched on a coffee-stained napkin, was so radical, so dangerous, that they said it would shred the wings off the plane. I'm your host, and tonight I'm telling you my story. This is, they said my propeller would shred the plane. Now it makes us fighters 100 MPH faster. Before we open the hangar doors on this one, I need you to do your pre-flight checks. First, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It's the only way to make sure you never miss the real stories from the Forge of War. Second, hit that like button. It tells the algorithms that this history matters, that these forgotten engineers deserve to be remembered. And finally, drop a comment below. Tell me what country and city you're watching from. It's a hell of a thing to see our community stretching across the globe. Now grab your slide rule. We've got work to do. You have to understand the sound. That's where it all started. Not in a briefing room, not in a lab, but with a sound. It was the sound of fear. We'd hear it in the test flight recordings. A low, guttural shudder that would start in the nose of the plane, a P-47 Thunderbolt. Once it crossed about 480 miles per hour in a dive, it was a vibration so deep, it wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling. You'd hear the pilot's breathing get shallow, hear him grunt as he tried to pull back on the stick, and the stick was useless. It was like it was set in concrete. The plane would just keep diving, the shudder growing into a bone-rattling roar until the recording stopped. They called it compressibility. A nice, clean, academic word. It meant the air, at that speed, wouldn't get out of the way. It would bunch up, stack, and turn solid. These localized shockwaves would form all over the wing and, crucially, over the tail. The bubble of turbulent air would flow back from the prop and the wings, and it would blank the elevators. The pilot was no longer flying. He was a passenger on a 7-ton missile, and the ground was coming up fast. The Germans, they had a plane, the Focke-Wulf 190, that was notorious for it. Their pilots would get a Mustang on their tail, and they'd just jam the stick forward, diving away. Our boys, brave as they were, couldn't follow. They'd hit that wall, that 500-maf shudder, and have to pull off, cursing, while the enemy escaped. Sometimes they couldn't pull off at all. I was a junior engineer at Wright Field in '43. My official title was Propulsion Test Analyst, which was a fancy way of saying I was the guy who changed the spark plugs on the test engines and wrote down the numbers. I wasn't a real aerodynamicist. I didn't have a doctorate from Caltech. My degree was from a state school, and my real education came from greasy engines and broken parts. The men who were the real aerodynamicists, the ones with the bow ties and the pipe smoke, were led by Dr. Evelyn Harrington. Harrington was a man who believed that if a solution couldn't be proven on a blackboard with a stick of chalk, it wasn't a solution. He was obsessed with laminar flow, with streamlining the fuselage, with squeezing another 10 horsepower out of the Merlin engine. He saw the problem as an airframe issue. He was, to put it bluntly, wrong. I spent my days in the test cells, and my nights reading the pilot reports from the 8th Air Force. The reports were raw, full of rage and terror. I had him, one read, a 190 at 20,000. I pushed over, 450, 470. Then the shaking started. It felt like the engine was trying to jump out of the cowling. I had the stick all the way back in my gut, and she just kept diving. I blacked out and woke up at 5,000 feet, the plane screaming. I was lucky. Smith wasn't. I saw him go in. That was the word, over and over. Shaking, vibration, engine. It wasn't the airframe vibrating. It was the propeller. I went into the wind tunnel on my own time. I ran the numbers. At 2,700 RPM and 500 miles per hour, the tips of that big, broad, 12-foot propeller weren't just moving fast. They were breaking the sound barrier. They were going supersonic. Each blade, 3 or 4 of them, every single rotation, was creating its own miniature, violent shockwave. The prop wasn't pulling the plane anymore. It was slapping the air, creating a vortex of turbulence so massive it was choking the entire aircraft. The propeller was literally creating the very wall we were crashing into. The prop, the thing that gave us life, was also our executioner. I knew, in my gut, I was right. I spent a month in the library sketching, doing math I barely understood. The solution wasn't a thicker blade. It wasn't a different pitch. The solution was to delay that shock wave, and the only way to do that was to change the shape. I sketched it on a napkin in the base cafeteria, a propeller blade that didn't just come straight out from the hub. It curved. It swept back, gently, like a scimitar. The leading edge was impossibly thin, almost a razor. The tips, where the speed was highest, were swept back at a radical 35-degree angle. In my mind, it was beautiful. The swept-back design would, in theory, trick the air. The airflow would see a slower, thinner blade, delaying the onset of the supersonic shockwave. It would allow the prop to keep biting the air, even at speeds where the old paddle blades were just uselessly churning. It was, I thought, a revelation. I requested a meeting. I, Arthur Jenkins, the glorified mechanic, was going to present my idea to Dr. Harrington and the entire aerodynamics board. I spent a week making my drawings perfect, checking my math, rehearsing my speech. I walked into that conference room and the air was thick with pipe smoke and condescension. It was a panel of gray-haired men who had been designing propellers since the Wright brothers. I was 28 years old, and I had grease under my fingernails. I put my drawings on the projector. I talked about tip speed. I talked about compressibility. And then, I showed them the sketch, the scimitar. There was silence. Not a good silence. A heavy, dead, suffocating silence. Then, from the back, a snicker, a quiet, dry laugh. It was Harrington. He stood up slowly, taking his wire-rimmed glasses off to polish them. "Mr. Jenkins, is it?" he said, his voice dripping with a sort of bored academic cruelty. "Your enthusiasm is commendable, but your engineering is, to put it charitably, juvenile." He walked to the projector and tapped the image of my swept-back propeller. This is a structural absurdity. Do you have any idea, any at all, what you are actually proposing?" I started to speak. "Yes, sir, the sweep delays the shock wave. It's a death trap." He cut me off, his voice rising. "A blade this thin with this much sweep, at 2,700 RPM, it will flutter. It will develop a harmonic resonance so violent, so catastrophic, that it will not simply break. It will disintegrate. It will shred. It will turn to shrapnel, Mr. Jenkins. This propeller of yours will tear the engine clean off its mounts. It will saw the wings from the fuselage. You haven't designed a propeller. You have designed a self-destruct mechanism. You have, in your naivety, created the most efficient method of killing a pilot I have ever seen." The room was quiet now. The snickers had turned into smug, knowing looks. They were all nodding. I was the fool. "Now," Harrington continued, turning his back on my drawing, "if you are quite finished wasting our time with your cartoons, I suggest you get back to the test cell. We are trying to find a solution for the P-51's new intercooler, which is a real problem. You are dismissed." I stood there, frozen. My face was burning. I had been laughed out of the room. Not just dismissed, but humiliated. I gathered my drawings, my hands shaking with a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. They were wrong. They were all wrong. Their slide rules and their perfect equations hadn't accounted for the real world. They were protecting their theories. I was trying to save lives. As I walked out of that room, the sound of their casual laughter following me down the hall, I didn't go back to the test cell. I didn't go home. I walked across the airfield, in the twilight, to Hangar 4. This was the boneyard hangar where they kept the wrecks, the planes that hadn't been lucky. In the corner sat the mangled, shattered remains of a P-38 Lightning, its props bent into knots, and next to it, on a rack, was a spare hub assembly for a P-47. It was unauthorized. It was illegal. It was insubordination. I didn't care. I found a liberated block of high-strength aluminum alloy, one that had been lost from inventory. I pulled the cover off a milling machine that was supposed to be tagged for repair. I tacked my coffee-stained napkin sketch to the wall. The experts, the men in charge, had said it would shred the plane. Fine. They'd had their say. Now it was my turn. I hit the power button on the lathe and the machine shop roared to life in the darkness. I was going to build it, and I was going to prove them all wrong, or I was going to die trying. The laughter had been the fuel, but the pilot's reports, those were the mission. Hangar 4 became my sanctuary and my prison. The place smelled of old oil, bird droppings, and the metallic ghosts of dead airplanes. By day, I did my job. I was Arthur Jenkins, the compliant, invisible analyst, changing oil filters and dutifully logging test cell data, all while enduring Dr. Harrington's smug, knowing glances in the cafeteria. He thought he'd put me in my place, that he'd crushed my little rebellion. He didn't know that his laughter was a catalyst. He didn't know that every night from 10 p.m. until 4 a.m., I was a different man. I was a machinist, a metallurgist, a man possessed by an idea that was, As Harrington had so kindly pointed out, big enough to get me court-martialed. I couldn't do it alone. After the first week, I was burning out. My hands were raw, and I'd already broken 2 priceless milling bits on the high-tensile aluminum block. I needed help. I found it in Salty Mike Dugan. Salty was the chief of the Propeller maintenance shop, a man who had been balancing props since they were made of wood and fabric. He was 2 years from retirement, cynical, and hated Dr. Harrington with a passion that burned with the heat of 1,000 suns. Harrington, Salty had once told me, is a man who can tell you the precise molecular weight of a fart, but he's never actually had to smell one. I found Salty in the boneyard, smoking an illicit cigarette behind a wrecked B-17. I didn't show him my math. I didn't talk about compressibility. I just showed him the napkin sketch. He held it up to the moonlight, the ash from his cigarette falling onto the drawing. He stared at it for a full minute, not speaking. "It's a scimitar," he finally grunted. "Like a damn pirate sword. You're insane, Jenkins. You know that, right?" "The tips are going supersonic, Salty," I said, my voice quiet. "This is the only way to stop the shockwave from choking the wing." He took a long, slow drag, the cigarette cherry glowing red. "Harrington see this?" "He did. Said it would disintegrate and saw the wings off the fuselage." Salty let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Did he now? Well, that pompous, chalk-dusted son of a bitch. He might be right." My heart sank. "But," Salty continued, flicking the cigarette away in a shower of sparks, "he's also an idiot. He's thinking about resonance. He's not thinking about balance. You can make a goddamn crowbar fly if you balance it right." He looked at me, his eyes sharp in the darkness. "I'll help you, but if we get caught, I've never seen you before in my life, and if this thing shakes itself apart on the test stand, I'll be the one to tell your mother." We became a 2-man conspiracy. Salty was a master of the midnight requisition. A set of bearings for a P-47 hub fell off a truck. Access to the high-speed balancing machine, which was supposed to be locked. Guard owed me a favor. For 6 solid weeks we worked. The process was agonizing. My design was not a simple, flat blade. It was a complex 3-dimensional curve, swept back and twisting along its entire length. We were carving it from a solid billet of aluminum, a process that screamed in protest. The milling machine, a huge, ancient Cincinnati model, shuddered under the strain, the floor slick with cutting oil. We'd spend 12 hours to carve a single inch of the leading edge, checking the curve against a plywood template I'd cut by hand. We were sculptors, not mechanics, and our medium was a metal that wanted to fight us at every turn. Harrington's words haunted me. Flutter, resonance, shred. He was right about the danger. A blade this thin, this raked, would want to flex and twist itself to death at high RPM. I was a propulsion man. I knew the forces involved. A single tiny imbalance, a hairline crack, would multiply under the centrifugal force until the entire 12-foot disk of death would simply explode. I realized my initial design, the one Harrington had laughed at, was flawed. It was too thin at the trailing edge. It would flutter. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Harrington had been right, but his solution was to throw the idea away. Mine was to fix it. I spent 2 sleepless nights, and I found the answer. It was simple and it was brutal. We couldn't make the blade thicker, that would defeat the whole purpose, but we could make it tougher. We'd finish the blade, polish it to a mirror shine, and then we'd damage it, intentionally. After the final agonizing polish, Salty and I took the first finished blade, a gleaming, beautiful, razor-edged scimitar that looked more like a piece of modern art than a propeller, and we carried it over to the shot-peening cabinet. We blasted the entire surface with millions of tiny, high-velocity steel ball bearings. The process destroyed the mirror finish, leaving a dull, matte, almost powdery gray. It looked ruined, but I knew what it had done. It had hammered the skin of the aluminum into a state of high compressive stress, making it incredibly resistant to the tiny surface fractures that would lead to catastrophic failure. We had created an invisible armor. After 6 weeks, we had 4 of them. 4 identical, dull gray, alien-looking blades. They were terrifying. They didn't look like they belonged on a P-47. They looked like they belonged on a spaceship. We laid them out on the hangar floor. They were perfect. "Well, kid," Salty said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You did it. You made the goddamn pirate swords." His voice was heavy with a new kind of dread. "Now, who in their right mind is gonna fly it?" The question hung in the oily air. A test pilot would have to sign his life away, to bet it all on my napkin sketch and Salty's balancing. I didn't have an answer, but the answer found us. A new voice, young and arrogant, cut through the hangar's silence. "I will." We spun around. Leaning against the hangar door, chewing on an unlit cigar, was Captain Jack Ripper Riley, not a test pilot, a combat pilot, an ace with 15 kills, who was on a 30-day rotation back from England to advise on fighter tactics. He was famous, reckless, and known for flying his P-51, the Galloping Ghost, in a way that terrified the engineers. "I've been watching you two grease monkeys sneaking around in here for a month," Ripper said, walking into the light. He nudged one of the blades with his flight boot. "I heard Harrington's little speech at the O Club, said some junior pencil pusher tried to invent a suicide prop. This must be it. Captain, this is an unauthorized project," I stammered. "Get out of here, Captain," Salty growled. "This ain't your business." Ripper just grinned. "It is if it's fast. My Mustang, she's a sweet lady, but those 190s can still dive away from me. I hate that. I hate it more than anything. Your prop, it looks fast. You say it'll stop the shaking?" I cleared my throat, trying to find my voice. "The math says it will. It'll delay compressibility. It should give you control in a high-speed dive, way past 500. Ripper stared at the prop, then at me. His grin was gone. He was calculating. "The boys in Harrington's office are trying to add a new water injection system. They say it'll give me another 50 horsepower for 5 minutes. You're telling me this blade will let me use the 1,500 horsepower I already have?" "Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm saying." He was silent for a long time. Then he spat a piece of his cigar on the floor. "Mount it. I'm taking the Ghost up tomorrow at 600. I'll test your goddamn pirate swords myself." I was stunned. Salty was stunned. This was it. A combat ace was going to fly my illegal, untested, revolutionary propeller. But just as I started to feel a wild, terrifying surge of hope, a new shadow fell across the hangar door. The beam of a high-powered flashlight hit us, pinning us like rats. Captain Riley, Mr. Dugan, and Mr. Jenkins. The voice was cold, precise, and shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. "It is 0430 hours. You will all explain to me exactly what you are doing in this hangar, with my airplane and with this contraband." It was Dr. Harrington, and he wasn't alone. He had the base commander with him. The beam from Harrington's maglite was a scalpel, pinning the three of us against the dark metal of the hangar. It was cold, pure, and merciless. Behind him, Colonel Davis, the base commander, stepped into the light, and his face was something I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep, volcanic, disappointed rage. He was a man who had to write letters to mothers, and he saw us as three fools who had just volunteered to create more. "So," Harrington said, his voice soft, which was 1,000 times more terrifying than a shout. "The cartoon is real." He walked forward, his flashlight beam moving from my face, to Salty's grimace, to Ripper's annoyingly calm, cigar-chewing expression. His light finally settled on the gleaming, alien-like propeller. "Theft of government property, Mr. Jenkins. That's a high-strength D6 alloy billet, serial number 48190. Reported lost from the experimental casting lab." I checked. My blood went cold. He'd been watching us. He'd been waiting for us to fail. "Willful destruction of a frontline combat aircraft, Captain Riley," he continued, "which I believe carries its own special article under the UCMJ. And you, Mr. Dugan, after a 40-year career, conniving with a junior analyst to build a device I personally forbade, a device I proved, on paper, would lead to catastrophic structural failure." He turned to the colonel. "Sir, I warned Mr. Jenkins. I told him this propeller would shred the aircraft. He has ignored a direct order from a superior, stolen materials, and roped a decorated combat pilot into his suicidal fantasy. I recommend these men be arrested and held for court-martial." Colonel Davis didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. He just stared at the propeller, his jaw working. "Captain Riley," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly disappointment. "Of all the pilots I have, you, an ace. You know what it takes to get a P-51 into the European theater. You know the man-hours, the resources, and you let this kid bolt a piece of unverified, untested, illegal scrap metal to the front of it. You were supposed to be advising on tactics, not committing suicide on my airfield." He pointed a finger at me, and I felt my knees shake. "Jenkins, you're done. Your career, your life, you've just thrown it all away. You've endangered an American hero, and you've dragged a good man." He nodded at Salty. "Down with you." "Sergeant," he barked at an MP I hadn't even seen, standing in the shadow. "Take these men into custody. Lock down this hangar. This thing is evidence." The MP stepped forward, his hand on his sidearm. Salty sighed, his shoulders slumping. He'd known this was the price. He looked at me and gave a small, grim shrug as if to say, "Well, we gave it a shot, kid." I was numb. It was over. All those nights, all that work, for this, to be marched out of a hangar in disgrace at 4 a.m. But as the MP reached for my arm, a sound cut through the tension. Laughter. It was Ripper. He wasn't just grinning, he was laughing. He took the cigar out of his mouth and pointed it, not at Harrington, but at the colonel. "Respectfully, sir," Ripper said, his voice suddenly all business, all ace. Dr. Harrington is a genius. I'm sure his math is beautiful, but he's never had to watch a Focke-Wulf dive away, his own plane shaking so hard it damn near rips his teeth out. I have. I've lost 3 wingmen to that compressibility he talks about at the O Club. 3. Good men. Dead because their planes hit a wall of air. He walked over and slapped the flat of his hand against my propeller, the one Harrington had called a death trap. It made a dull, solid, metallic thunk. Dr. Harrington's theories are paper, Colonel. This, he slapped it again, is metal. His solution is another 2 months of wind tunnel tests. My war is now. Theirs is now. He turned and faced the Colonel, his eyes blazing. You're right, I'm grounded. You're gonna court-martial me anyway. So what's the risk? Let me take it up. 1 flight, that's all I'm asking. 30,000 feet. 1 dive. I'll point it straight at the ground and firewall the throttle. If this thing shakes, if it flutters, if it makes one goddamn sound that I don't like, I'll pull out, I'll land, and I will personally testify at Mr. Jenkins's court-martial. I'll tell them he's a maniac and you were right to lock him up. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, savage whisper. But sir, if it works, if this kid is right, if this pirate sword lets me dive through that wall, you'll be the commander who let me find the silver bullet. You'll be the man who gave the 8th Air Force the one thing they need to finally break the Luftwaffe. 1 flight, Colonel. What's more important, your regulations or winning the goddamn war? The hangar was dead silent. The MP's hand was frozen inches from my arm. Harrington was sputtering, his face a blotchy, apoplectic purple. Colonel, this is unconscionable. It's a violation of every test protocol. It's— Shut up, Doctor, Colonel Davis said, his voice soft. He didn't look at Harrington. He didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on Ripper, on his ace. He looked at the impossible, swept-back blades of my propeller, and then back to Ripper's stone-cold, deadly serious face. He was a man trapped between a regulation and a revelation. His next words would either send me to Leavenworth or to the sky. Colonel Davis's eyes were like granite. He stared at Ripper, then at me, then at Salty, and finally, his gaze settled on the cold, precise, furious face of Dr. Harrington. The silence in the hangar stretched for an eternity, broken only by the drip of a leaky oil pan on a wrecked B-25 in the corner. The MP's hand was still on his holster, waiting for the one word that would end our careers. Colonel, Harrington pressed, his voice a venomous whisper. Every second we delay is a validation of this insubordination. I demand these men be confined. This project, this abomination, must be documented and destroyed. Davis held up a single gloved hand. The gesture was so sharp, so final that Harrington actually recoiled, his mouth snapping shut. The Colonel turned his full attention back to Ripper, ignoring the rest of us. He was a commander, and he was looking at his best, most lethal weapon. You've lost 3 wingmen to compressibility, the Colonel stated. It wasn't a question. Smith, Alvarez, and Jock Peterson, sir, Ripper said, his voice instantly devoid of all arrogance. It was flat, cold, and full of ghosts. Alvarez, he was trying to follow a 190. His tail just shredded. We saw it. The Colonel closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the decision had been made. 1 flight, Captain, he said, his voice a low, gravelly order. 0600, your plane, your neck. But here are my terms. He jabbed a finger at Ripper. You are not, I repeat, not to engage in any unauthorized maneuvers. You will take her to 30,000 feet. You will perform one straight-line test dive. The moment you feel a single flutter, a single vibration, a single tickle that isn't supposed to be there, you will pull out, throttle back, and land. You will not be a hotshot. You will be a test pilot. Is that understood? Crystal, Colonel, Ripper said, a small, tight smile returning. And you, Davis said, wheeling on me, and you, Mr. Dugan, will be in the control tower on the radio with me. And you, Dr. Harrington, will be standing right next to us. You can bring your slide rule and your list of regulations. You are all going to witness this one way or another. Sergeant, put your hand off your weapon. The MP, looking relieved, stepped back into the shadows. Now, the Colonel barked, get this thing, on the flight line. You have 90 minutes. Mr. Jenkins, Mr. Dugan, if I find one, single, bolt out of place, I will personally ground this plane, and I will throw you in the brig myself. Get to work. The next 90 minutes were the most terrifying, most focused, most intensely alive I have ever been. The hangar, which had been a secret forge, was now a legitimate, high-stakes operating theater. We rolled the galloping ghost under the bright overhead lights. Salty and I were no longer conspirators. We were a surgical team. We worked in a blur of silent, practiced motion. We weren't just mounting a prop. We were arming a bomb, and our best friend was going to sit on it. Every movement was precise. Salty, his hands steady as a rock, used the high-speed balancer one last time, adding a quarter-ounce weight to the hub, his eyes closed, listening to the machine's whine, chasing a vibration so small it was almost theoretical. I triple-checked the torque on every single mounting bolt, marking each one with a grease pencil. I ran my bare hands, not my gloves, over the razor-thin leading edge of each scimitar blade, feeling for a microfracture, a burr, a single tiny imperfection that could, at 500 miles per hour, bloom into a catastrophic failure. I was touching the physical manifestation of my own theory, and it was cold, solid, and utterly terrifying. Harrington's voice echoed in my head. It will shred. Ripper stood apart, already in his G-suit, drinking black coffee from a thermos and smoking his cigar. He was watching us, his eyes unblinking, his confidence in us more frightening than the colonel's threats. He was betting his life on my math. As the sun began to turn the eastern sky from black to a deep bruised purple, we were done. Salty gave the hub one final, loving pat. "She's balanced, kid," he whispered to me, his voice hoarse, tighter than a new watch. The rest is up to God and the air." We were marched to the tower, a glass-walled box perched over the airfield. It was cold, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and radio ozone. Colonel Davis was already there, his binoculars in hand. Harrington stood in the far corner, arms crossed, a smug, funereal expression on his face, as if he were patiently waiting for the inevitable disaster. I was given a headset and a seat at the radio console. Salty stood behind me, his hand gripping my shoulder so hard it hurt. Below, the galloping Ghost was a lonely silhouette on the vast empty runway. The cockpit canopy was closed. The radio crackled to life. "Tower, this is Ghost, requesting clearance for experimental test flight." My throat was dust. I pressed the transmit button. "Ghost, this is Tower. You are clear for takeoff. 06 right. Godspeed, Captain." "Roger, Tower." Ripper's voice came back, all calm and business. "See you in a bit." We watched as the Merlin engine barked to life, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the familiar deep-chested thrum of a P-51. The scimitar blades, even at idle, made a high, thin, vicious hiss. It sounded like a giant tearing a ream of silk, a sharp, sibilant shriek. Harrington actually took a step back from the window. "My God," he whispered, "the harmonic frequency is already audible." "Shut up, Doctor," the colonel snapped. Ripper pushed the throttle forward. The plane didn't just accelerate, it leapt. The sound was no longer a hiss, it was a scream, a high-pitched, terrifying banshee wail that ripped the morning air to shreds. The plane was off the ground in less than 800 feet, half the normal distance. It didn't climb. It vaulted into the sky, going vertical, the shriek of the prop echoing off the surrounding hills. It was the most beautiful, most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Well," Salty breathed behind me, "she didn't shred on takeoff." The next 20 minutes were an agony. We listened to Ripper's calm, metronomic breathing as he climbed. Ghost, passing Angels 20, Angels 25. The plane was a silver speck, then nothing. "Tower, I am at test altitude, 30,000 feet. His voice was thin in the high, cold air. "Sky is clear. Visibility total. She's very smooth up here, Arthur. That vibration we used to get in the hub at 2500 RPM, it's gone. She's just smooth." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Okay, Colonel," Ripper's voice crackled. "I'm pushing over. Commencing test dive. For the record, I am firewalling the throttle. Now." My heart stopped. I was no longer breathing. Salty's hand on my shoulder was a vice. All I could hear was the open mic hiss from Ripper's cockpit, a sound that was slowly growing in pitch. "Airspeed, 450 knots, Ripper's voice said, strained by a slight G-load. 460. We were in the red. This was the speed where the old props began to shake, where compressibility set in. I saw Harrington lean forward, his smugness replaced by a new, intense, academic curiosity. He was listening. 480, Ripper's voice. "This is where Alvarez bought it. No shake. Nothing. I can't feel the prop. It's just smooth. Holy hell. 500. He was past the wall. He was through it. 510, 520. "Colonel, she's not shaking. She's accelerating. I've still got full elevator control. She's solid as a rock." "Pull out, Captain," the colonel barked. "That's enough." "Negative, sir. Just a little more." Ripper's voice was tight with a wild, crazy joy. 540, 550. I'm at 550 miles an hour and she's flying like a goddamn arrow." Harrington had gone sheet white. His pipe fell from his mouth and shattered on the concrete floor. He was staring at the radio, his entire life's work, his theories, his certainty, all dissolving in the static. Okay, I'm pulling her out," Ripper grunted. We heard the deep groan of a man pulling 7 Gs. "She's pulling out, clean, no shudder, no buffet. She's out, level at 15,000. The radio was silent for 5 seconds. Then, it burst to life, not with the voice of a test pilot, but with the high, giddy, unbelieving laughter of a man who had just seen God. "Yee-haw, Arthur! You magnificent son of a bitch, you did it! She's a rocket! She's a goddamn rocket! I can catch anything in this! I'm bringing her in! Requesting a low pass, Colonel. A fast one. I want you to hear this thing." The Colonel turned, his face pale, but a slow, dangerous smile was spreading across his lips. He looked at Harrington's shattered expression. "Negative on the low pass, Captain. Get your plane on the ground. We have work to do." He turned to me, the smile growing. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder that nearly sent me to my knees. "Get your drafting paper. We're going to need to talk about manufacturing. And find a name for that thing. The scimitar is good, but I like the sound of the shredder." The shriek of the prop returned, a sound that would redefine the skies over Europe. It was a high, thin, tearing sound, a banshee's wail that announced a new kind of physics, a new kind of predator. We stood in the tower, 4 men in a glass box, and watched the galloping ghost materialize out of the morning haze. It wasn't flying, it was slashing its way through the air. Ripper's landing was immaculate, a perfect 3-point touchdown, but the way the plane bled off speed was all wrong. It was too clean, too fast. As he taxied toward the hangar, the ground crews, drawn by the ungodly sound, just stopped. They dropped wrenches. They backed away. They stared at the propeller, which hissed as it spun down, the 4 swept blades looking like an alien starfish, something that didn't belong on a P-51. But they were there. They weren't shrapnel. They weren't twisted knots of metal. They were just perfect, gleaming with a light coat of morning dew. Colonel Davis, Salty, and I were on the tarmac before the prop had even stopped spinning. We didn't run, we just walked, drawn by a gravity that had just been rewritten. Dr. Harrington did not join us. I glanced back at the tower. The glass box was empty. He was gone. There was no confrontation, no final angry speech. He had simply vanished. A man of unbending theory, broken by a single 10-minute flight. He was a ghost, and the galloping ghost was the new reality. Ripper threw back the canopy, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide and burning with a fire I'd never seen in another human being. He was breathing hard, not from G-force, but from sheer unadulterated adrenaline. He pulled his helmet off, his hair matted, and he didn't climb out. He vaulted out, jumping from the wing to the tarmac. He ignored the colonel. He ignored me. He walked straight past us, his flight boots thudding on the concrete, and stopped an inch from Salty Dugan. He just stared at the old man. Then he reached into his flight suit and pulled out his unlit cigar, the one he'd been chewing, and shoved it into Salty's breast pocket. "You, sir," Ripper said, his voice a low, rough growl, "are a goddamn artist. She's balanced. She's balanced like a diamond, not a single shake, not one." Salty, a man I'd only ever seen scowl, looked at the cigar, then at Ripper, and a slow, painful, beautiful crack of a smile split his leathery face. "Just stay off the grass, Captain," he grunted. And that, for Salty, was a victory speech. Ripper finally turned to me, the grin returning. "Jenkins, you magnificent greasy-knuckled bastard." He didn't thank me. He didn't congratulate me. He just clapped me on the shoulder, a blow that sent a jolt of pain and vindication straight to my boots. "You're going to be a very popular man, Captain Riley," Colonel Davis said, stepping forward, his face all business. "You are hereby grounded, effective immediately." The grin on Ripper's face vanished. "Grounded? Sir, I just hit 550 miles an hour in a stock Mustang. You can't ground me. I have to take this thing to Germany. Let me at them." "That's why you're grounded, Captain," the colonel said, his voice unyielding. "You are now the single most valuable pilot on this base because you're the only one who knows how to fly that propeller without blacking out. Your combat tour is over. Your new job is to teach our other test pilots how to handle that speed. You are now in command of the Scimitar Project Flight Test Division." Ripper's jaw worked, but he saw the iron in the colonel's gaze. He was a soldier. He nodded. "Yes, sir." The colonel then turned to me, and the full, terrifying weight of the United States Army's procurement system descended on my shoulders. "Mr. Jenkins, you're fired from your position as an analyst." My heart stopped. Salty tensed. "Your new title," the colonel continued, a razor-thin smile on his face, "is Chief Special Propulsion Projects Right Field. You will answer directly to me. Hangar 4 and Hangar 3 are now under your command. I am giving you unlimited requisition authority. I want a set of production-ready, finalized blueprints on my desk by Monday. I want 50 sets of these blades by the end of the month." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Sir," I stammered, 50? We barely made 4 in 6 weeks, and that was as a criminal, Mr. Jenkins," the colonel said, his voice sharp. "Now you are a program. You will have every machinist, every lathe, and every block of alloy you need. Your midnight requisitions are now priority Alpha 1. Am I understood? I looked at Salty. He just nodded, that grim but proud look back on his face. Yes, sir, I said, my voice finally steady. I'll need Salty as my shop foreman. Mr. Dugan, the colonel said, turning to him. Your retirement request, which I see just hit my desk, is denied. Indefinitely. Salty just spat on the tarmac. Figured as much. Gonna need more coffee. And tell the mess hall we're on a 24-hour schedule. This kid, he doesn't sleep. And that was how the war changed. That was the moment my cartoon went from heresy to doctrine. My life, which had been a quiet existence of data sheets and oil pans, became a 24-hour-a-day blur of blueprints, stress calculations, and the constant, high-pitched scream of milling machines. We didn't just make more, we made them better. We refined the aerodynamic cuff near the hub. We worked with metallurgists to create a new forged aluminum process that cut manufacturing time by 80%. We didn't just make them for the Mustang, we designed new sets for the P-47 Thunderbolt, for the P-38 Lightning, and the first 200 sets were loaded onto C-54s and flown straight to England, bypassing Harrington's entire bureaucracy, with a single note from Colonel Davis, per order of General Spaatz, mount these, now. And the reports, my God, the reports that came back, they were the exact opposite of the ones I had read before, the ones full of fear and failure. These new reports were soaked in a kind of savage, disbelieving joy. I kept one, tacked to my drafting table, from a major in the 4th Fighter Group. I don't know who you people are, it read, but I want to kiss every one of you. I was escorting bombers over Schweinfurt and 2 190s jumped us, the usual. They bounced us from above and went into a dive, thinking they could just walk away. My wingman, a rookie, started to follow, but he was in a standard P-51. He hit the wall at 20,000 feet, his plane shaking so hard I saw pieces of his canopy fly off. He had to pull out. I did not. I pushed my throttle forward, and I followed. I think I must have been screaming. The German pilot, he looked back. I'll never forget the look on his face. It was confusion. It was terror. He was at 500 MPH and I was closing on him. He was in a coffin, shaking himself to pieces, and I was in a rock-solid screaming arrow. He didn't even have time to bail out. I didn't fire a single shot. His plane just came apart. The prop. It's the prop. Send more. We did. The kill ratios in the 8th Air Force, which had been a hard-fought 3-1, jumped to 7-1, then 10-1. Our fighters, with the scimitar blades, were now a full 100 miles per hour faster in the dive. But it wasn't just the speed. It was the control. We had given our pilots back their elevators. We had given them the dive as a weapon, not an escape hatch. That invisible wall in the sky, the one that had been killing our boys, was now a trap for the enemy. They'd dive to escape, and they'd find us waiting for them, already through the barrier, our prop tips screaming that high, thin shriek that the Luftwaffe came to call the Devil's Lament. They said my propeller would shred the plane, and they were right. It shredded the old rulebooks. It shredded the assumptions of men like Harrington, who was quietly transferred to calculating fuel consumption tables for cargo planes in the Aleutians. It shredded the myth of German air superiority. It shredded the confidence of an entire generation of enemy pilots who thought the dive was their final, safe, guaranteed escape. They laughed at me. They called my idea a death trap in a room full of experts. And now that death trap was the very thing that was clearing the skies over Europe, the very thing that was ensuring our bombers and our pilots came home. My name is Arthur Jenkins. I'm just a mechanic, but I listened to the sound of fear, and I drew a picture on a napkin to make it stop. And it worked.